When I mention or use the word family, what are the feelings that you normally associate with that word? For many, it's a feeling of warmth. There are positive feelings that we connect with this word family. And now I say most because there are some, of course, that may not have had the most warmest of family upbringings. Families aren't perfect. Some families are less perfect than others. And so not everyone feels a warm association with that particular word. But I think everybody, irrespective of what your own experience has been, everybody knows or senses perhaps that the ideal of family, the ideal of family is certainly according to the principles of God's kingdom. Those ideals are certainly something to aspire to. And as a result, through life, God often places people in our lives that can become family members, even though they may not be related by blood. We have older people that come into our lives that become surrogate mums and dads and even maybe grandparents. There are younger people that come into our lives that we mentor and they become like sons and daughters. There are even friends that we connect with that over time become closer than a brother or a sister. In fact, there's an expression in the English language that relates to this idea that often family can be a cobbled together connection of relationships. And that expression is family is where you find it. And so as we open up to the first chapter of Ruth today, and if you make your way there in whatever way you have, either in your old school Bibles or opening up it on your device, just turn or open up to Ruth chapter 1. Ruth, if you're having trouble finding it, a small book at the beginning or close to the beginning of the Old Testament. It's just after Judges, isn't it there, Mr. Ray? It's just after Judges and just before 1 Samuel. You found that there? You've got the digital copy, have you? Just looking online, are you? Oh, you have got the old school Bible. Okay, well done. Open up there and you found it, which is fantastic. It's a small book, Katie, of how many chapters? 4. And we're going to look at chapter 1 today, and we're going to look at the story of Ruth, which is an unconventional family. A family that is irregular. Because, of course, often in life, family is where you find it. David, let's just have a look at the first verse here of Ruth chapter 1. In the days when the judges ruled Israel, a man from Bethlehem in Judah left the country because of a severe famine. He took his wife and 2 sons and went to live in the country of Moab. Now here in this opening verse of this story of Ruth, there is to the reader a shock. And that shock gets lessened by a couple of millennia of time and a very different culture. The shock is this. The word Bethlehem, where this family has come from, the word Bethlehem means the house of food, or the house of bread. And the shock is that in the house of food, there is no food. That's not the only shock. The bigger shock comes that this family had to move east across the River Jordan from Israel to a traditional enemy's country, the country of Moab, in order to find better economic situations. It'd be kind of like today, let me modernise it a little bit. It'd be like today hearing the shocking news that a Jewish family from Tel Aviv couldn't find employment, so had to move east to Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. I look around the room and not many of you are shocked by that. I think I need to find another example. It'd be kind of like an Australian family not being able to find work and as a result moving east across the Tasman to New Zealand because the economic situation there was much better. That'd be shocking, wouldn't it? And that's the shock of Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. There is no food in the house of food, and they have to move east to an enemy. Not that that's got anything to do with New Zealand, by the way. And we get introduced there in verse 2 to some of the names. Their names mean something in Ruth and in the Bible. So we get introduced to the dad, Elimelech, which means God is my king. We get introduced to the mum, Naomi, which means pleasant and gentle, doesn't it? Yes. We get introduced to the two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. And Mahlon's name means sick and diseased. And Chilion's name means finished and annihilated. So it shouldn't come as any surprise as we read a few verses later that Mahlon and Chilion don't last very long. And neither does Elimelech. Neither does the dad. And here is Naomi, pleasant and gentle. And here she is, having lost her husband and her two sons, and she's far from home. And we feel something for Naomi, don't we? Just a little bit. We feel sorry for her. We feel sympathy. She's alone. There is loneliness. And we feel a bit for her. And look, our feelings for Naomi don't just extend to her emotional state, but also to her economic situation. Back then, women couldn't own businesses, they couldn't own property, their ability to generate an income was incredibly limited. Back then, if you had no man, you had no financial plan. Thank goodness, those times have changed somewhat. To the women and to the young girls in the audience, thank goodness those times have changed. To Naomi, though, not having a man meant that she was in dire economic circumstances. So how will Naomi survive without her family? Well, the answer is that family is where you find it. Let's have a quick look at the next bit of the story. And I want to read verses 6 and 7 with you here. Have you found that there in your scripture? Ruth chapter 1, verses 6 and 7. Some of you are feeling disappointed that I've been so lazy I haven't thrown the Bible verses up on the screen. My apologies. But go old school, look it up on your phone. Verses 6 and 7. When she heard in Moab, we're talking about Naomi here, pleasant and gentle. When she heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, Naomi and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her two daughters in law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Who are these two daughters-in-law? Well, verse 4 gives us their name. One of these daughters-in-law that had been married to her two sons, one of them was named Orpah. And it may interest you to know that Oprah Winfrey was named originally Orpah from the book of Ruth. But nobody could actually say Orpah, they ended up calling her Oprah, and the name stuck. Does that interest you there, David? Maybe not. So there's Orpah, and then there is the eponymous Ruth, in which the book is named after. David, can I just get you to check that I've used the word eponymous correctly there? Any words over 3 syllables I struggle with. So maybe just check that I've used the word eponymous correctly there. We have Orpah and we have Ruth. Naomi realises, as they begin to go home, that having 2 Moabite women in Israel may not be such a good thing for them. It may be helpful for her, but having these 2 strange enemy women in Israel may not be a good thing for these 2 young women. And this is what Naomi says to them there in verse 8. Go back to your mother's homes instead of coming with me, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me. Verse 9, may the Lord grant that each of you will find rest. May you find Sabbath in the home of another husband. And there's a great example of healthy families, isn't there, David? Sometimes in healthy families, individuals within that family do things that may not be good for them, but they know is good for the broader health of the family. I mean, mothers are always doing that, aren't they? They're always doing things that may not suit them, but are good for everybody else. Dads, not so much. Teenage kids, was probably best to leave it there, I'd say. But that's the sign of a healthy family, and this is what Naomi is doing. She loves Orpah, loves Ruth, wants them with her, but knows that it probably won't be good for them if they come back. And there's tears. There's tears from Orpah, there's tears from Ruth, there's tears from Naomi, and then there is a twist. And here is the twist. Have a look here at verse 14, will you? Verse 14, at this, the 2 daughters-in-law wept again. And then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. And this is the last we hear of this woman, Orpah. But Ruth clung to her. And here is the twist. Because the image we have in this story is of, when we read Ruth clings to her, the image we have is of Ruth hanging around Naomi's legs. Do you get that image in your mind as you picture the scene? Orpah cries, says her goodbyes, but Ruth clings to her, and the picture is of Ruth around her legs saying, "No, I don't want to go." But no, and here is the twist. That word that gets translated clings is the same word that Genesis uses to describe marriage. Ooh. You know, in Genesis 2, a man shall leave his mother and father David and cleave to his wife, or cling to his wife. It's the exact same word that gets used here. What is being described here between Naomi and Ruth is a relationship akin to marriage. I'm not talking about anything sexual here. I'm just simply saying that some families are irregular in nature because family is often where we find it. We talk sometimes about church family. And just like any family, it sometimes has good times and bad times. But just like any family, relationships take time and effort. Sometimes it just takes showing up, even if you don't feel like it. But as a result of being willing to give and be given to, that a church community like this can be and should be a family. Family is where you find it. Look, I have a love affair with Sabbath school time. I like and love Sabbath school time. That hour, I know it's only an hour, but it's a time of when you show up and there'll be good times and bad times, and sometimes you don't feel like it, but you pray for someone else, and they pray for you, and you check in on them. They check in on you, and you share scripture, and you apply it, and you encourage, and you rebuke sometimes, and you, as a small group, do life together. This family is where you find it. And then we have this wonderful conclusion, David, to chapter 1 of Ruth in this first part of a 3-part series today and the next 2 weeks. And Katie will have to do chapter 4 next month perhaps. But there's this wonderful conclusion here that I know as we read this you will recognise these words. It's probably the most famous words from the book of Ruth. And it comes from verses 16 and 17. Because Naomi tries at least one more time to encourage Ruth to go back home. But Ruth recognises that her home is now with Naomi. And this is what Ruth says to Naomi. And you'll recognise this, I'm sure. Naomi, where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. And your God, my God. And where you die, I will die. And there I will be buried. And may the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. There's a marriage vow, isn't it? If anything but death should separate us. And Ruth and Naomi returned to Bethlehem as a family. Because family is where you find it. A number of years ago, I was working in Europe, and for about 4 or 5 years there, I had a job to do in the country of Romania. Any Romanians here? No Romanians. We need to do a better job of reaching out to the Romanian community then, if that's the case. But every year I would spend mostly the summer there in Romania, because it's a far warmer place in the summer than the winter, but I did spend the occasional winter there. And my work was working with an orphanage there in Romania. And for those who are old enough, you may remember in the 90s some terrible images coming out of Romania of orphanages having their children chained to beds, and it was a terrible situation. And so I worked with an orphanage just soon after. The reason for that situation there in Romania during the 1990s was that the communist government under Nicolae Ceausescu, the Romanian dictator for decades, they made it Romanian law that every woman under the age of 40 had to have at least 5 children. For some of you, that's no problem, but for others, that might have been a struggle. But the communist government thought that they would grow the country under this legislation. And so what they did was they said, even if you can't look after these kids, we will set up orphanages that you have the kids, and then the government will look after them if you can't look after them yourselves. Now, when the communist government fell in 89, and there was a swirl of stuff happening in that year. Do you remember what else happened in 1989? The Berlin Wall fell, Hungary, communist government fell, Romania fell. Ceausescu and his wife were shot on Christmas Day on public television. Christmas Day, how's that for for watching TV on Christmas Day there and watching your dictator for 30-odd years being shot there. But what happened was that the country then went into chaos. And all of the money that would normally flow to fund these orphanages all dried up. And so you had like 100 kids with only one staff member, and the only thing that staff member could do, the staff member that stayed behind, was to tie kids to beds so as they didn't wander off everywhere. It was a terrible situation. And 20-odd years ago, I'm working in the aftermath of that with a Seventh-day Adventist orphanage there in the town of Ottobest, about 100 k's from the capital there of Romania. And here is what the church was doing. The church, in gathering children from these other orphanages and also new kids coming in, the church was building homes for these kids, 6-bedroom home, 10 kids, 2 to a bedroom, and then employing Seventh-day Adventist church members who felt a calling to be parents, but they had to sign up for a long term. And so we'd build these homes and put these parents who felt called into it, sometimes with their own kids, and these 10 other children, where they would grow up over the next 10 years as a family. And my job was twofold. My job was to raise some money that these families could have a holiday by the Black Sea during the summer. It was great by the beach. Camping was fantastic. My other part of my job was to continue raising money and bring over building equipment and builders to build these homes. That was my job. I wished I had the Dutchman's job. The Dutchman, whose name I've forgotten, David, that's why I've called him the Dutchman, his job in the Netherlands was once or twice a year to bring over a semi-trailer of clothes, but also toys. When I arrived, kids ignored me. When the Dutchman arrived with his semi-trailer, yells of excitement. And all the kids would yell out, "Jokori, Jokori, Jokori!" And if you get your Google Translator there, Toby, and translate the Romanian word of Jokori into English, you will know immediately it's toys. Toys! Toys! And so here in this village of kids, for a few years, I got to hang out each year and watch these kids grow. And the challenge, of course, is that in an orphanage, it's very easy to find another home for babies. But when the kids are 4, 5, 6 years of age with a troubled background, post-traumatic stress disorders, anxiety and stress, those kids aren't as easy to find homes for. And so the solution as far as the church over there was concerned was to build houses, to build homes, to find couples who were called to it, and within those homes provide some semblance of a sense of belonging. Because family is where you find it. Those kids now have all grown up, they've gone to university, got jobs, they've started having kids of their own. It wasn't ideal. There were mistakes made. There were difficulties. There were challenges. It wasn't perfect. No family ever is. But by God's good grace, Ruth, family, and a sense of connection and belonging and love, family by God's good grace is where you find it.